Um, this is not just a problem for atheists. There are many different views of God, different even theologies that I think misunderstand and misapply the solution for the problem of evil, which we're going to be talking about tonight. Oh, it popped back up. Did I do that? Um, so basically, what is being said is if evil exists in this world, then either God cannot be all powerful or he cannot be all good. If there is evil in the world and God does exist, then he's not powerful enough to stop the evil. He's good, but he doesn't have the power to do anything about it. If God does exist and there's evil, then they would say, well, he has power, but he doesn't care. He is not a good and loving God. And so this is where people, last week, I think we ended talking about, creation in the natural world and, realizing the firm footing that we are standing on. We're not going to be swayed by the countless arguments that are brought to us, and we have some pretty strong arguments ourselves. What will happen is the discussion will shift from scientific evidences, if you want to call them that, to more of a philosophical argument, an argument about morality. Well, why is there so much evil in the world? And you might hear that brought about a few different ways. Now, just like with we were discussing the last topic, we want to try to understand where people are coming from. They've been taught since their youth about evolution and the Big Bang, and there not being any God, and science proving these things is what they're taught, and so they don't have a way to grasp what we are trying to share. By the same token, if they're being fed all of these things, and they're also hearing about a God, and they might think, well, I can hold both of these things to be true. But again, in their own experience of daily life, they see constantly over and over again evils, atrocities happening in the world. They see abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. They see people, children in the world that are starving, being sold as sex slaves, people being tortured, people with diseases, incurable diseases that just leave them suffering and in pain. They think about situations like wars. We all have studied the Holocaust and all the atrocities that happened there. What terrible things people were going through, and to bring it to your own life, you might have yourself gone through something that was awful, that was terrible, that you wouldn't wish on anybody. The loss of a loved one, watching a loved one suffer, you yourself going through pain and suffering. And there's a time in all of that where you think, why, God? How can this be? And you understand in those situations, you begin to question things in a way with a perspective that you never did before. It's a difficult thing to sit beside somebody who is suffering in this way and asking these questions. And as a Christian, you want to be there for them and lift them up, but this is hard. People in the world see that. They experience that as well. But they don't have an understanding of who our God is. They don't have a relationship with Him. And they have no reason to believe that He exists or cares about them if He does. if they're going to go through this kind of turmoil. And you might know somebody who's a Christian who has suffered like this, and knowing as they are taught that God knows everything, which means he knows you're suffering, but more than that, he knew you were going to suffer. And yet he allowed it to happen anyway. If he knew before creation that you were going to go through this kind of trial, and yet he allowed it to happen anyway, how can that be a good God? So it becomes natural, the easiest thing to say, well, then there must not be a God. We can't understand it. We don't like the pain of it. And so rather than fight a God we believe in, we just say, no, I'm just going to believe there's not a God. That's a whole different kind of battle. But a lot of people go that direction because of this problem of evil. Well, there's a problem with this idea because, okay, if there's evil in the world and you're saying there is no God, how do you define what is evil? By what definition is something good and right? By whose standard is something wrong? By whose standard is something evil? Because you could think something's evil, and I think it's okay if we're just going based on, think so's. If there is nothing outside of us that sets a moral law, a moral standard, what are we comparing things that we experience to? What are we comparing those things to? I think if we look around, we see all kinds of evil, and even these days, we could see the world saying this is evil. We can see atheists, we can see non-believers, people who don't believe in God saying this is evil. This is wrong. Okay, we understand that truth because we understand God is real and he is the lawgiver. He's the one that says what is right and wrong. He sets the standard. We understand that, but how can they say that? If they say there's no God, then that means there can't be anything that's truly evil. C.S. Lewis says it this way: a man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. Is there something that is outside of our own experience? Is there something that we can judge according to? Something that is a law? Something that is objectively straight, good, right? That we can say if it doesn't meet this criteria, it's evil, it's wrong, it's bad. The world lacks that, and yet everybody in the world recognizes evil when they see it. Now, there are people who argue that point, but to argue the world is evil or unjust, then an atheist has to appeal to some objective standard of good or justice. If there is no God, that means there's no objective standard, only personal preference, or some preference to minimize harm. So, in fact, what we see, if it is true that evil exists, then there must be some objective moral lawgiver. If there is right and wrong, then there has to be some way outside of us in our experience. We can't do this based on, majority, because we're all different. There must be something outside of ourselves. So the fact that evil exists, the fact that there is morality, that there is right and wrong, actually is an argument in favor of God's existence. So don't be thrown by these questions. Uh, Now we can hear this, and 99% of the time, for the majority of us in this room, we're not going to have these conversations with professors of philosophy. We're not going to have these conversations with people that we see on TV, teaching these classes, making these arguments. We're going to be having discussions with friends who have gone through something hard, or are just parroting something that they've heard before. And so moving from getting them to understand this idea of the fact that evil exists in the world means that good exists in the world, and there is some moral lawgiver, that is going to go a long ways in your conversation and getting them to understand the existence of God, and the fact that, we're not touching yet why evil exists, but the fact that because it does, and you see that it does, means that there must be a God. You're moving in that direction. But there are some who now will move into redefining the word evil. They'll say, well, it's not moral evil. It is suffering or pain. It is something bad that happens in the fact that when you experience it is negative. And any negative experience, any pain, any suffering, any harm, that then is what we're talking about when we're talking about evil. Well, then the question next is, okay, are you saying that any harm, any pain is just evil? Blanket statement. Is all pain evil? What do you guys think? Is any pain ever positive? Yes. Sorry? Childbirth. Oh, childbirth is a good one. We might circle back to that one later. There's something really positive that comes despite after all that birthing pains. Yeah, so there are people that don't have that ability to feel pain, and they've got to live inside a bubble because they don't know when they are being hurt. They'll leave their hand on the stove until it burns up if they're not paying attention. Somebody's got to be looking after them. They got to watch over themselves. So pain is important for that reason. Yes, sir. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so James, the lesson that we've been through, we talk a lot. James talks a lot about how the pains and the trials actually help grow us into what we are meant to be. And in a sense, any growing is going to take some effort. And if you're boiling down, the difference between pain and not pain, what is that famous phrase? No pain, no gain. Isn't that just about exercise and getting fit and working hard to reach a goal? And they're calling that pain, right? Because as you grow, you're going to stand up, you're going to fall down. You're going to get up and try again. As you learn, you're going to spend time in agony over your notes, trying to figure out, what all of this means. There is a process here. I mean, even if you think about the smallest thing, take a child to the doctor, and it's time for his shots. that child is going to scream and cry bloody murder, but you're going to hold that child there in order to experience that pain, right? You want him to have that pain. It's not about the pain, is it? It's about what comes with it. That protection, that ability to grow. That so then the question is, okay, if some suffering and pain is good, which everybody will agree, this isn't something that nobody will agree on. Everybody agrees that some amount of pain is good. Okay, well then who decides? Who decides the level here of pain, which is good and which is bad? Okay, so then that's easy. That's simple, right? That everybody can understand that. Okay, so we need some objective ability. So what they'll move to is another descriptive word. We need something that is okay. Evil is unnecessary suffering. That's okay. We're moving away from evil. We're going to classify harm as unnecessary suffering. Does that happen? Does that exist? Is there such a thing as unnecessary suffering? From our perspective, it seems so, right? There are some things we don't know why it happens. And you can imagine if we have a hard time with it as Christians, certainly the world does. Why do we suffer in these ways? Why do these diseases exist? Why does it hurt? Why isn't there just an alarm or a light that flashes when I have my hand on the stove? Why does it have to feel bad? Why is there unnecessary pain? There's an atheist, Dan Barker, who in a debate, he said this, morality is simply acting with the intention to minimize harm. Okay, so now we've moved to the problem of evil, to the problem of too much harm, right? So he's saying what we're talking about when we talk about morality is not that there's some objective truth, but that we are doing our best to minimize harm. Anybody see a problem with that? To who? Yeah. Who is this harm perpetrated against? That's good. He answers. He asks himself a question here as he says this. He says a sentence. Morality is simply acting with the intention to minimize harm. Okay, how do you decide the best way to minimize harm, Mr. Barker? He says to be informed as possible at the likely consequences of the actions being considered. Okay? So, whatever you do, if it's going to cause harm, in order to be moral, you need to have an idea of the consequences of whatever action you're going to take. In other words, you could have harm here, and you could have harm here. You can act to that thought question about the people laid up on the railroad track, and the train is going to hit those people, unless you flip a switch and the train goes on the other track. But by flipping the switch and moving it to the other track, there's one person over there. Well, Dan Baker would say, well, you send it to the one person because that minimizes harm. One person has died. It's simple for him. I'm sorry, don't think too hard about that because that's not the topic of tonight's. I just use it as an illustration to minimize harm in your own mind. What that means is you know all the consequences. In other words, what he's saying is if you know the future, then you are able to make the moral decision. This is an atheist. Who did he just describe? God. God knows all the future, all the consequences. Who is best suited to make these decisions? Well, we would say God, obviously. He would say it's up to you as an individual to figure this out. What is the least amount of harm? If morality is just about minimizing suffering, uh, pointless suffering, who decides if it's pointless, right? Again, if you are giving a child a shot, does he get a say in whether or not he gets that shot? Based on his limited view of the future, that pain is all there is. Does he get a say in whether or not he gets that shot? Because from his perspective, he would say, no, thank you. The most moral thing for me as the infant, can you imagine a little baby saying that to its parent? Excuse me, mother. Morally, I disagree with this. I think it would cause minimal harm if I did not receive that shot. What would the mother say? Well, from my perspective, knowing the consequences, I think you should have this shot, right? I mean, that makes sense to us. That's the parent deciding, it would be pointless not to give you the shot, even though the child says it would be pointless to get the shot. What does God say? That's the question. If we are understanding that the child is not able to make this decision because the parent can understand things better, is there any other being? Is there any other person who might be able to understand this better? Let's leave God out of the picture. Which person, which human being is going to make that decision? Who's going to decide what's pointless harm? Who's going to decide what is the most minimal amount of harm? I don't want to have to make that decision. There are some people who would, though, aren't there? Would they be right? No. That was the answer. I didn't have to look at my notes to say that. You already knew that anyway. So there's a lack of knowledge here, a lack of knowledge about how meaningful it is. If there's a reason for us going through this, how major this amount of pain is, and whether or not pain in and of itself is evil. There is no knowledge here. But just because you don't have the knowledge doesn't mean that the thing that's happening is good or evil or neither one. It doesn't mean that there is no objective morality. Really, again, going back just to get out of the weeds just for a second, what they're claiming is there's evil in the world, therefore there is no God. What do you base that on? You have no standard without some greater power objectively making the rules. Epstein Island, is that evil? Yes. Can the world say that's evil without God? Not without objective morality. It's just a choice that he made. He prefers something more than minimizing harm. Hitler prefers something more than minimizing harm. So minimizing harm is not high on their priority list, so they don't even care about that. This makes the assumption that everybody's going to look around and be, quote unquote, moral by deciding together what brings the least amount of harm. That's not going to happen. So there is a problem with this view that the problem of evil negates God. Let's see. All right, we're going to look at some Bible verses, but keep in mind 1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason. For what? The hope that is in you. Without God, there is no hope. This is something that we are sharing with them. We want them to have the same hope we do. Again, this is not just about them understanding that we are right. This is about trying to save their soul. without losing our own. And so if they come with this argument, you need to know that you're on firm footing before you go into this conversation and get lost in the weeds. So we're going to look at some passages. Is this a difficult situation? We'll come back to why the hope thing is important, but let's look at some scriptures. Numbers chapter 11. Here are these Israelites who have been taken out of Egypt. By the way, if you were there Sunday night, do you remember what the Israelites were doing while they were in Egypt? In chapter 5, early on, what they were doing was crying out to God to release us, right? That's what they wanted. They come, God, minimize this evil, this harm, take us out from here. Now in Numbers chapter 11, they're crying out to God, send us back to Egypt. Do you think they have a good grasp on what the consequences are of their actions and their requests, their preferences? Well, in Numbers chapter 11, all these people are crying out. In verse 10, Moses heard the people weeping throughout their clans, everyone at the door of his tent, and the anger of the Lord blazed hotly, and Moses was displeased. Verse 11 says, Moses said to the Lord, why have you dealt ill with your servant, and why have I not found favor in your sight, that you lay the burden of all this people on me? What is he asking? Why? Why is this happening? Is that a question of why is this evil? Why is this evil happening? All of these people are against me. Do you think people in the world see it as an evil thing when everybody is out to get them? When nobody is doing what is right in their eyes? Why is all of this happening to me? This is not a foreign question to any of us. We all have these questions. Moses has this question, why are all these people getting on my nerves? It's stressing me out. And not to belittle it. Look down a few more verses, verse 15. If you will treat me like this, kill me at once. Where does this idea of why all this pain, the problem of pain, leads Moses to ask God to do what? Just end it. End my life if I find favor in your sight, that I might not see my wretchedness. I don't want to be here. Why did you choose me? I can't do this. What did Moses not know? What was Moses, because he's human, like all of us in his situation would probably break, right? What did he not see? Couldn't see what God saw. Did God have a plan for those Israelites? Yes, he did. But Moses, in the suffering, can't see it. He's in it. He's deep in it. He hasn't said, okay, there's evil in the world, therefore God doesn't exist. He's calling out to God just like we might. In the depth of pain and sorrow, cry out to God, why is this happening? I'm doing good, and I'm treated this way. Why is there evil in the world? Psalm chapter 13, this is David. Look at what he says in the first two verses. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? What's he asking God? He says, how long? Asking about the problem of evil, isn't he? Why is this evil happening? Why isn't the world good? He's suffering these things. Psalm 73, different author, I believe it's Asaph. Is that right? Anyway, he's also writing the first 3 verses. By the way, if you have time later tonight, go back and look at these verses and follow the verses a little bit further. And especially Psalm 13, you'll see a beautiful resolution. You see the same thing in some of these other passages we'll look at. Psalm 73, verses 1 through 3. Truly, God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled. My steps had nearly slipped, for I was envious of the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. What does he see in the world? Wickedness. He sees evil. And not only that, he sees that the evil are prospering. Why? Why is this happening? It's causing me to lose track of my feet, to lose a step, to lose my focus. Where's his focus supposed to be? Anybody? Focus on God. Where is his focus? On himself. Yeah. And how the people around him are better off than he is. It's all here, right? This focus on self is blinds us to what's out there in the future. That hope. Moses couldn't see past the situation he was in. He wanted to end it. David couldn't see in those first few verses. He's asking the same question. Why? This Asaph is asking the same question. Turn to Jeremiah. Jeremiah, the first 4 verses of chapter 12. Righteous are you, O Lord, when I complain to you, yet I would plead my case before you. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why do all who are treacherous thrive? You plant them, they take root, they grow and produce fruit. You are near in their mouth and far from their heart. By the way, just because we're coming off that series, who does that sound like? Near to their mouth and far from their heart. The false teachers, right? Yeah. Hello. I can see you. You can nod your head or whatever. It's fine. Yeah, the false teachers, right? Near in the mouth, they're talking about God. They're talking about their relationship with God and how they know God, far from their heart. Why is this happening? But you, O Lord, verse 3, know me, you see me, and test my heart toward you. Pull them out like sheep for the slaughter and set them apart for the day of slaughter. How long will the land mourn and the grass of every field wither? For the evil of those who dwell in it, the beasts and the birds are swept away because they said, he will not see our latter end. What did Jeremiah not know? Anybody got their Bible open to Jeremiah 12? Because the Lord answers in verse 5. Oh, verse 5 to almost the end there, verse 13. What does Jeremiah not know? Wait, just think about verse 5 for a second. He's asking, Jeremiah's asking, why? Why is there evil here? Why are these evil prospering? God answers this way: if you've raced with men on foot and they have wearied you, how will you compete with horses? What? What does that mean? Think about the picture. Okay. All right, Jeremiah. You're getting worn out doing what you're doing. You're racing with men. And you're now you want to race horses? In other words, you're asking me these questions and you think you can handle them? And you're being wearied out by what you see? You think you can handle more? What does that suggest? What does Jeremiah not know? He doesn't know much at all, does he? He knows what's going on in his realm, his experience. He doesn't know what God knows. He doesn't know what's going on outside. It's funny because God answers Job in similar fashion, doesn't he? Did you have a comment? Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you've not seen anything yet. In fact, that leads into the next passage, Habakkuk. Habakkuk chapter 1. I don't know if you remember the story in Habakkuk, but Habakkuk is crying out to God, Lord, how long shall I cry for help and you will not hear, or cry to you violence and you will not save? Why do you make me see iniquity, and why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me, strife and contention arise. So the law is paralyzed and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous and justice goes forth perverted. He's crying out to God, look at your people. Look how evil they are. Aren't you going to punish? Aren't you going to do anything about this, God? Why are you allowing this evil? You're a good God. You're all powerful God. Why are you letting these things happen? I'm saying these questions that we have when we're suffering, they're not new. They're dealt with over and over again in Scripture. The questions the world has, they're not strange to us. They're asking the same questions that we all ask. God gives Habakkuk an answer, and it's similar to what Reed was saying about Jeremiah. What is in store? Well, it's punishment for Israel, but it's not quite the punishment that Habakkuk had in mind. You know, he had his preference. He had his idea of what would be the minimal harm and yet still bring punishment, but there was a harm that was needed here. God says, I'm bringing Babylon. I'm bringing the Chaldeans. Don't you worry your little head, Habakkuk. I'm bringing punishment to punish these people. Habakkuk knows what that means. You think Israelites are evil. These people do not know God. They have not a care in the world. That's evil. And God says, I'm going to punish my people. Don't worry. Habakkuk then says, you who are of purer eyes to see evil and cannot look at wrong, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked, that is Babylon, the Chaldeans, when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? See, he's got this idea of levels. I'm here surrounded by evil, evil being the Israelites, the Jews, God's people. But the Babylonians are way more evil. In fact, thinking about their evilness makes the Israelites the righteous man. In Habakkuk's eyes, why are you bringing evil on the good? Don't bring that punishment, please. Why would you do that? I'm going to guess that the answer is, again, beyond him, beyond his understanding, because God knows the future and he knows what is best. Romans 8:29. What does that say? Paraphrase? Anybody? What does God do for the people who love him? 28. Yeah. All things come together for good for those that love the world. Lord. Ooh, that's a big mistake. For those that love the Lord, all things work together for good. God knows what he's doing, and we can trust him in it. Job. Oh, I didn't. I skipped this. No, I didn't. Okay, Job. Job has these questions. We know he goes through all this terrible affliction. He sits all this time, and he has his friends come by, and they're no help. They want to. They hear him asking these why questions about, why am I suffering these things, and his friends start giving him answers to fix it. You probably sinned in this way. You probably sinned in this way. And then Elihu comes around and says, well, you don't know. Maybe you're suffering for this reason. Maybe you're suffering for this reason, which aren't necessarily bad. But then God comes. God comes and begins questioning Job. Job, who was sitting there and seeing all of this evil, right? All of these bad things happen. And he was suffering so much that he curses the day that he was born. Do you think he has a view of the future in that place that he's in? He's blinded by the evil and suffering and pain that are around him. He doesn't want to have anything to do with it. So he says, explain to me these things. God begins to question Job. Hey, Job, you know everything, right? You want to ask me these questions? Let me ask you a question. Were you there when I laid the foundation of the earth? Were you there for that? Since you know everything and you know how the order of things and what's right and what's wrong. Can you tell me if you have understanding? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? Declare if you know all this. Shall a fault finder, God says, speaking about Job being the fault finder, shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? You're going to find something wrong with me, Job. Are you making yourself out to be my judge? He who argues with God, let him answer it. Will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me that you may be in the right? That is the question that the atheist asks. That is the statement that the atheist makes. I am judging God. He is in the wrong. God says, if that's the case, you're taking my place. You are saying that you belong here and you know more than I do. And we understand how dangerous that can be. But again, they don't have a relationship with God. They don't believe in God. At least that's what they say. Was that the second bill? First bill. Okay. So I don't know if we'll get to the complete answer here. I know I want to finish a whole class, but I'm leaving you hanging. Let's go to Acts and see where we get. Remember, this is what Dan Baker says. If you want to know how to make the most moral decision, you need to be as informed as possible at the likely consequences of the actions being considered. Is that what God says too? If you want to argue with me, do you know this stuff? Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. That's right. And that's the problem with this. Now, since I'm going to go off on a tangent, since I know we're not going to finish class. Consciences can be seared. Okay? Our enemy twists the truth. So in saying that we can all recognize evil, that doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions that have been created to that rule. And by created, I don't mean God created it, but the evil in the world. Some of the very decisions to choose something immoral have created these immoral monsters, right? That will choose something immoral and say, this is right. In fact, God talks about this often, about people who will call good evil and evil good. that is what is going on. Now, just because there are people that exist in the world like that, that doesn't mean that they did not at some point have the capacity to see what is right and wrong. Right? We'll go back and read Romans 1 and we'll see that these things are evident for everybody. There is enough evidence for everyone to understand that God exists. And I think he goes on to say not only that, but understand that there is an objective morality. Any more comments or questions? I can hear them. They're the monsters about to come in. Thanks for your time.